I want to dedicate this particular segment to all those young ladies who were just little girls growing up in unfortunate environments and under unfortunate circumstances. You know, us males who come up in the inner city, we have a story of our own in terms of challenge, coming directly face to face with the temptation of drug use, distribution, police brutality, incarceration, and even worse a lot of times death. But young ladies who were just girls coming up under those circumstances have a whole other slew of challenges that some of us kind of overlook because the males get so much attention being somewhat on the front line. But when we think about those young ladies who just coming out the house and like every teenager dealing with esteem issues, you're trying to find out where you fit in at, and you remember what your parents or your guardians may have said, but the streets tell a whole nother story. And as you begin to develop, both mentally and physically, you have your temptations. And a lot of times, you begin to indulge in activities earlier than what would be considered the norm, earlier than you're actually prepared to do so. And a lot of times it results in having a baby at a young age. And through those situations, the male father who is young, again, not prepared, finds himself trying to figure out what he's supposed to do. And by the way, hats off to those couples that do survive such and do prosper and raise a healthy child together. But so many times that male is locked up or dead, and you're left to deal with the child. Even cases where he just may be neglectful because he's trying to figure it all out himself. And you find yourself looking for love in all the wrong places. And before you know it, there's 1, 2, 3, and sometimes even more children. And then there are multiple children, fathers. And of course, it weighs on you. And sometimes it can affect your esteem. And it can affect your self-worth. But I want you to know today that no matter what your situation or circumstance may be, it's never too late to get it right. Or sometimes we don't get to have best. And that's in the ghetto and outside of the ghetto. We don't get to have best. Best would be that the first guy that you were with sexually is a guy that you marry, have children with, and y'all live this whole American dream. But you can have better. And better is the alternative. It's the alternative to worse. Worse is that you give it all up and say the heck with it. And you begin to neglect your own responsibilities towards yourself and your child. And you end up in places, dark places, that some people don't come back from. Be it drug addiction, institutions, and all the like. And that would be worse. But you can have better in the sense of building yourself up, taking care of your responsibilities. And sometimes we make the task a lot harder than it has to be. Because not only are we suffering, and not only are we dealing with the everyday challenges of life, but we are entrenched in a culture that dictates one way or the other that unless you are looking like this, and unless you are wearing this particular name brand, that you're not in a place that deems you to be sufficient. And that's why it is important to have your own identity and to have your own style and to know that you can look good and you can flourish with just by being clean, just by taking care of yourself, your hygiene. And you don't have to have on the top shelf material things. It's nice. I'm not saying nothing is wrong with it. But it has to make sense. And it doesn't make sense when you have children that aren't up to par in terms of their appearance and their physical and mental health and what they may be being exposed to if you're looking like you're flexing. You can reinvent, recreate yourself at any time, and you can demand the respect that you deserve just by the way that you carry yourself. And you do yourself a disservice when you live in that illusion that sometimes the culture puts pressure on us, and sometimes even the music puts pressure on us to live up to. You do yourself a disservice. Because if you do want a decent guy, he may not come packaged like the guys that you're catering to. A working class guy who is investing in his life and his future, who just may be attracted to you and be accepting of you and your children, he's not going to have a mindset that's going to be agreeable toward you reaching so high without dealing with the in-betweens. Meaning that you're not taking care of your responsibilities in terms of your bills, your children. You're not in the house at a certain time. You're dropping your children off with people. And there's no judgment here. I'm just telling you what I know. What I know from having multiple relationships. What I know from having multiple sisters, biological and just, sisters and female friends that I grew up with. You want to go out, you put your kids sometime in harm's way and you don't realize it. Because a lot of times we don't know who people are behind closed doors. So when you leave your children with people and 10 years later your child tell you that this person was allowing him to do this or doing this and that to it, it happens all the time. But sometimes you're so desperate just to go out because you need a break. The children, you want that exhale. The children are in your ear all the time. You're running around the house, you're doing this and then the other. So when that opportunity comes and your girlfriend say, come on, let's go. and the only person that's available is this person that you half know, or they live in a certain kind of way that you don't even consider. You just know that they're going to have your children for the night, and anything can happen. But again, the guy who may find interest in you uh, initially because of your appearance, and he may even see potential in you, but he sees the way that you're living. So sometimes it's a disservice in the way that you're living. But you'll say you want a good guy. You want a guy who would accept your children and embrace them just as much as he embrace you, and rightfully so. You all are a package. But you got to understand, when you want something in life, you have to make room for it. And if you're living in such a way that it's not going to be attractive to the kind of person, in this case, that you desire, then you're basically blocking your blessing. So I encourage you to consider these things, and I encourage you to think outside the box. I encourage you not to let the culture, not to let our music, which is entertainment, and a lot of them aren't living that way themselves, and if they are, I mean, they got $200,000-$400,000 contract, sometimes $1 million dollar contract, and they can do a whole lot of things. That's their job now. But you got to know how to distinguish what is reality for you and what's not. And in this way, you begin to transform not just your person, but you begin to transform your life. There are many women who have come up and who have had multiple children and have found good men who love them and love their children, who have, helped open up and create a whole nother life for them. You have some good men out here like that. So I encourage you to keep your head up. I encourage you to redefine yourself. And more than anything, to stay encouraged. Because sometimes giving up doesn't look like what we would think that it would. Giving up doesn't mean someone has their head down walking around, or they're somewhere in a room in the dark, stressed or depressed. Sometimes giving up looks just the opposite. That person who looks like they're enjoying themselves, but in the inside they're hurting. And when they're by themselves and they're on their way to sleep at night, they're thinking about their life, but they're caught up in that cycle. Because the next morning, girlfriend gonna call and say, hey, what you gonna do Friday? Or what's up? I'm coming over. We're gonna be doing this today. A lot of things that's detrimental to where you may want to go, where you may really desire to go. But you got to understand, if you don't start moving in the direction of where you want to go, how you gonna get there? And that direction may call for you to cut some people off, cut some things off, make some sacrifices, and exercise some discipline. You have a whole different and a whole nother level of struggle of your own, sis. So you have to take advantage of every opportunity for you and your child or your children, and it has to be in spite of what the child or the children's father may be doing or not doing, or bringing to the table or not bringing to the table. Someone neglecting your children is not a justification for you to neglect also, in the different forms that it can come sometime. Because sometimes grandparents and other relatives and friends raise your children just as much as you, because they're with them more. You have to take responsibility. You have to take responsibility for how you carry yourself. And that means that you set out a certain amount of details that distinguish yourself from others. So no matter what's in your environment, don't have to influence you. And because everybody is going this way, you don't have to go that way. You have set the standard and decided, I'm going to live like this in spite of the environment and what I see outside of my living quarters. I remember my mother, who was very big on hygiene, very big on keeping things clean around the house. And we were in the heart of ghetto. I mean, I seen enough roaches and I seen enough mice, rats. And it wasn't because we were living that way. I mean, you couldn't leave a crumb on the table. You did spring cleaning in my house, so forth and so on. But sometimes the place was just so infested that they would be just going through. Even if they're trying to get through your apartment where they don't have no reason to be there because there's no food left around or anything like that, but they trying to get next door. So it's just a part of the environment. My mother used to say the ghetto is out there. In here, this your home. And that may not apply to everybody. I'm not saying that everybody in the ghetto is living foul and have rats and roaches. I'm just making the point that no matter what's going on in your environment, what's going to ultimately determine where you go at in life is what's going on inside of you. And if you harness that and you move with that, then you're setting a direction for your life. And eventually, whether a man comes into your life or not, you'll find yourself and or your children in a place that's more pleasurable and more desirable for you. So the bottom line is we have to recognize that you all do have a struggle. And we have to recognize that it's a unique struggle aside from the male struggle that comes up and is faced with the jail time. Not saying that you all are accepted from that. That's faced with so much institutional racism and temptation that a lot of time is designed to keep the prisons filled. That may not be your only struggle, because that is part of your struggle, because you're in the environment where these things are prominent. That is the target. But your struggle is unique in the sense that you come up as a young girl who is dealing with hormones, body is developing, you're trying to find yourself in the midst of all the things that goes on around you. And God forbid that you may have parents that were on drugs and you seen some things and some people come through the door that shouldn't have. God forbid that you were affected by some kind of abuse, molestation. These things happen. God forbid that you was told to hush and don't say nothing. God forbid that too played a part on what may have been the road to your promiscuity. But at some point, as we become adults, we have to take responsibility for our own lives. An environment affecting you, though it does, it is no longer an excuse. You affect your environment. You create your environment, even if that means making your way out of it. And the evidence is very clear. Many have done it before you. You don't have to stay there. You can break that cycle. Because what happens is that you raise your children there because that's where you stayed. And then your little girls, they repeat that same cycle. And your little boys, they repeat the same cycle. And then they have children. And then we have generation after generation after generation. In an environment that is very risky for so many reasons. So it is very important that you understand who you are and that you understand what your life can be, and that you set forth to go about getting from one place to the other. Utilize all your resources and all your opportunities. They are there. There are no excuses. Don't let what you can't do right now stop you from doing what you can. I know you're fed up. Keep your head up, sis.